There are weapons that kill quickly, and there are weapons that kill brutally. And then there are weapons that exist for a far worse purpose, not merely to destroy the body, but to annihilate hope itself. Among all the nightmares humanity has ever built in its endless wars, there is one creation whispered about with a mixture of reverence and terror. A machine so ancient that entire civilizations have risen and fallen while it continued to walk. A war engine that does not house a pilot, but a corpse that cannot be allowed to die. This is not a tank, not a robot, not a hero. It is a dreadnought, and if you truly understand what that means, the fear never really leaves you. To see a dreadnought for the first time is to feel your instincts fail you. Your mind tries to categorize it, to make sense of its size, its shape, its purpose, but nothing fits. It is too tall to be infantry, too deliberate to be artillery, too personal to be a vehicle. It does not rush. It does not hesitate. Every step it takes lands with the certainty of something that knows the outcome has already been decided. The ground trembles beneath it, not violently, but insistently, like the steady heartbeat of a god that has not slept in 10,000 years. And yet, the true terror does not come from its weapons. It comes from the knowledge of what is inside. Entombed within layers of ceramite and adamantium is a space marine who should have died long ago. A warrior once revered, once celebrated, now reduced to a fragment of flesh and memory suspended in nutrient fluids and pain-suppressing chemicals. Limbs gone, organs failing, senses dulled and distorted. This is not survival, it is postponement. A dreadnought is what happens when death is denied not out of mercy, but necessity. When a living being is transformed into a relic of war, preserved not for who they were, but for what they can still destroy. Imagine waking up after what should have been your final moment. No breath, no heartbeat you can feel, no body you recognize. Your voice is gone, replaced by vox emitters that boom like thunder. Your arms are no longer arms, but weapons capable of tearing apart armored vehicles. Your legs are pistons and steel, moving only when the machine allows. You are told you are honored. You are told you are revered. But you are never told how long this will last, because the answer is forever, or until there is nothing left of you to remember why you once fought. The dreadnought does not experience time the way others do. Decades pass in silence as it sleeps in a tomb-like chamber, mind drifting through half-remembered wars and fractured dreams. Then, without warning, it is awakened. Alarms, chanting, tech priests murmuring binharic prayers. Pain surges as systems reconnect, nerves, what remains of them, screaming as ancient interfaces bite once more into living tissue. There is no gentle return. Only the sudden realization that the war has come again, and you are still needed. From the outside, enemies see only the machine. They see a towering silhouette emerging through smoke and fire, its armor scarred by centuries of battle. They hear its weapons charging, feel the air ripple as it fires. But they do not hear the voice inside the sarcophagus. They do not hear the memories resurfacing, brothers long dead, oaths sworn to banners that no longer exist, worlds burned into ash. They do not hear the confusion, the rage, the desperate clarity of a mind that knows only one purpose now: kill, because that is all that remains. This is why a dreadnought is terrifying in a way no other weapon can be. It does not fight for glory. It does not fight for victory. It fights because stopping would mean facing what it has become. On the battlefield, morale breaks when a dreadnought arrives. Soldiers, who have stood firm against artillery barrages and orbital fire suddenly find their courage draining away. Not because the dreadnought is fast, it is not. Not because it is unpredictable, it is methodical. But because it does not care. Suppression means nothing to something that cannot feel fear. Wounds mean nothing to something that has already lost its body. Pain means nothing to something that lives in constant agony. Every tactic designed to intimidate, disorient, or demoralize simply fails. And when it speaks, when its vox systems crackle to life in that distorted, ancient voice rolls across the battlefield, it is worse than silence. Because it does not threaten. It does not boast. It declares. It names enemies long dead as if they still stand before it. It calls out battle cries from wars no one remembers. To hear it is to realize you are not fighting a soldier, you are fighting history itself, weaponized and angry. The cruelest truth is that, within the Imperium, the Dreadnought is considered a blessing. A second chance. A continuation of service beyond death. Young space marines look upon them with awe, dreaming of earning such honor, should they fall in battle. They do not see the long stretches of isolation. They do not see the gradual erosion of identity as memories fade and blur. They do not feel the growing disconnect between thought and action as the machine becomes more dominant than the mind within. They see only the legend, not the prison. Because a dreadnought cannot choose peace. When the war ends, it does not return home. It is sealed away again, locked in darkness until the next apocalypse demands its awakening. Each time, the intervals grow shorter. Each time, the mind inside frays a little more. Some dreadnoughts begin to speak to voices no one else can hear. Some forget which side they are fighting for and must be guided like living weapons. Some must be put down, not by enemies, but by the very brothers who once worshipped them. And still, they are deployed. Because when a dreadnought advances, the enemy does not see a future where they survive. This is only the beginning of the terror. Before we go any deeper, understand this: what you're about to hear is not just a story about a weapon. It's a story about inevitability. About something that turns every battlefield into a slow, grinding realization that survival is no longer an option. Stay with this video until the very end, because by the time we're done, you won't just know what a dreadnought is, you'll understand why even its allies lower their voices when speaking its name. Fear usually comes from chaos. From explosions, from sudden movements, from the unknown. But a dreadnought creates fear through certainty. When it arrives, there is no confusion about what will happen next. There is only a slow, dreadful countdown. Its footsteps are not rushed, because they don't need to be. Each step announces presence, dominance, and patience. It is the sound of something that has survived everything thrown at it, and expects to survive you as well. To those facing it, the first instinct is disbelief. Surely something that large, that old, that scarred must be vulnerable. Surely there's a weak point. A joint. A flaw. That hope dies quickly. Every mark on its armor is proof of a weapon that failed. Every scar is a story of firepower that was not enough. You realize, far too late, that you are not fighting the beginning of its story. You are fighting somewhere in the middle of a legend that refuses to end. And then there is the way it fights. A dreadnought does not react emotionally. It does not flinch. It does not retreat unless ordered. Incoming fire rattles against its hull like rain against stone. Where other soldiers dive for cover, it advances. Where morale should break, it simply continues. This creates a unique kind of panic, one where your actions feel meaningless. You are not battling a foe who might make a mistake. You are confronting something that has already made every mistake possible, learned from all of them, and outlived the lesson. The psychological weight becomes unbearable. You start to notice how it chooses targets, not randomly, not wildly, but deliberately. Defensive positions, heavy weapons, leaders. It dismantles resistance piece by piece, not out of strategy alone, but because it has done this thousands of times before. Each engagement is just another memory layered on top of countless others, all blending into a single purpose: erase opposition completely. And this is where the true horror begins to surface. Because the dreadnought is not driven by hatred. It is driven by duty that has outlived meaning. Inside that armored coffin is a mind trapped between past and present, reliving ancient wars while fighting new ones. Sometimes it addresses enemies by names that haven't been spoken in centuries. Sometimes it pauses, not from mercy, but from confusion, before continuing its advance with renewed violence. You are not just fighting a machine. You are caught in the echo of someone else's unfinished war. Those who survive encounters with a dreadnought, rare as they are, describe the same sensation. Not fear during the battle, but something far worse afterward. A lingering sense that they were never truly in control. That if the Dreadnought had wanted them dead sooner, it would have happened. That survival was not victory, but neglect. And that realization follows them long after the war ends, whispering that next time, they won't be ignored. So when people ask why a Dreadnought is terrifying, they're already asking the wrong question. The terror is not in what it does, but in what it represents. The refusal to let heroes rest. The willingness to turn sacrifice into eternal suffering. The idea that even death is not an escape from war. And this is only scratching the surface of the nightmare. There is a moment, rarely spoken of, when even a Dreadnought hesitates. Not on the battlefield, never there, but in the fragile space between sleep and awakening. In that moment, the mind entombed within the sarcophagus drifts freely, untethered from targeting systems and combat protocols. It remembers being human. It remembers breathing. It remembers names spoken with warmth instead of command. And for a heartbeat that no longer truly exists, it wonders if the war is finally over. Then the machine reasserts itself. Power floods ancient systems. Hydraulic limbs lock into place. Targeting arrays ignite like artificial stars behind deadened eyes. Pain returns, not as a warning, but as a constant companion. The memories are pushed aside, crushed beneath layers of duty encoded so deeply that resisting them feels like tearing one's own soul apart. The Dreadnought does not awaken willingly. It is dragged back into existence by necessity, by fear, by the unending hunger of war. This is where the horror deepens, because the longer a Dreadnought exists, the less clear the boundary becomes between warrior and war engine. Thoughts grow slower, heavier, distorted by centuries of isolation and violence. Some Dreadnoughts begin to relive battles that are not happening, firing upon shadows only they can see. Others grow eerily calm, speaking in measured tones that suggest not control, but resignation. They no longer ask why they are fighting. They already know the answer will never change. To fight alongside a Dreadnought is to feel both protected and profoundly uneasy. It stands as an unbreakable wall, absorbing fire meant for those behind it. It destroys threats before they can close distance. But there is always the awareness that it is not truly present. Orders must be carefully phrased. Commands repeated. Tech priests stand ready to intervene, to soothe the machine's spirit, or restrain it, should its ancient mind drift too far into the past. Because when a Dreadnought loses focus, it does not simply malfunction. It reverts to wars fought thousands of years ago. Reverts to enemies long extinct. Reverts to a time when mercy was a foreign concept and annihilation was the only solution. Friendly forces have learned this lesson the hard way. There are records, sealed, classified, buried beneath layers of denial, of Dreadnoughts turning their weapons on allies who resembled foes from forgotten campaigns. Not out of malice, not out of betrayal, but because to the mind inside, the war never ended. And yet, despite all of this, the Imperium continues to build altars around these walking tombs. Continues to praise them as saints of war. Continues to deny the truth that a Dreadnought is not a hero preserved, but a soul slowly eroding under the weight of endless violence. The reverence is not for the being inside, but for the destruction it brings. As long as it can still kill, its suffering is considered acceptable. For the enemy, however, none of this context matters. All they experience is the result. The moment when heavy weapons fail to slow its advance. The moment when fortifications crumble under relentless fire. The moment when retreat orders come too late, because the Dreadnought has already closed the distance. At close range, its presence is overwhelming. It blocks out the sky. Its shadow swallows hope. Its weapons do not fire wildly, they choose, they prioritize, they end. And when the battle is finally over, when the smoke clears and the screams fade, the Dreadnought remains standing. Silent, motionless, waiting, not for praise, not for rest, but for the next time it will be awakened and reminded, once again, that death was never meant to claim it. Because a dreadnought is not terrifying simply because it kills. It is terrifying because it endures. There is a lie at the heart of every dreadnought, and it begins long before the sarcophagus ever closes. It begins with the promise whispered to dying warriors on shattered battlefields. A promise of continuation, of legacy, of service beyond mortal limits. In those final moments, when pain drowns out fear and consciousness flickers like a failing flame, the offer sounds merciful. Live on, fight on, be remembered. Few are given the clarity, or the strength, to refuse. What is never explained is the cost. The transition is not salvation, it is disassembly. Flesh is cut away not with reverence, but efficiency. What remains of the body is reduced to what is strictly necessary to sustain the brain and vital organs. Sensations vanish one by one. Touch, taste, smell, even pain becomes something abstract, filtered through systems designed to keep the occupant functional, not comfortable. Identity begins to blur as the physical anchors of self are stripped away. You are no longer a person experiencing a machine. You are a component within it. At first, many dreadnoughts cling to who they were. They recite battle honors. They speak of brothers, campaigns, and oaths sworn under banners that still fly. Their voices, filtered and distorted, carry echoes of pride. But time is relentless. Centuries pass between awakenings. Names fade. Faces dissolve into fragments. Wars overlap in memory until they become indistinguishable. Eventually, even the reason they were entombed becomes unclear. They remember fighting. They remember killing. But the why slips further away with every cycle of sleep and war. This is where the Imperium's greatest fear reveals itself, not of the enemy, but of the dreadnought itself. Because a warrior who remembers why they fight can be reasoned with. A warrior who remembers only how they fight becomes something else entirely. Some dreadnoughts grow increasingly aggressive, interpreting hesitation as weakness, restraint as failure. Others withdraw, speaking less and less, responding only to the most direct commands. A few develop an unsettling calm, as if they have accepted that they are no longer living beings, but instruments of destruction. And still, they are awakened again and again. Not because it is kind, but because it works. On the battlefield, this internal decay translates into something horrifyingly effective. A dreadnought does not hesitate over collateral damage. Civilian structures, sacred sites, friendly fortifications, if something stands between it and its objective, it ceases to exist. The machine does not weigh consequences. It executes directives with brutal clarity. This is why commanders both rely on and fear them. A dreadnought guarantees results, but it also guarantees devastation. Those who witness a dreadnought at close range often speak of its presence rather than its actions. The oppressive pressure of standing near something so utterly indifferent to life. The sense that it is not aware of you as an individual, but as an obstacle. You are not hated. You are not judged. You are processed. And that realization strips away the last illusion of control. You are not part of a battle. You are part of a calculation already solved. There are moments, rare and unsettling, when a dreadnought speaks with unexpected clarity. When it recalls a name accurately. When it asks a question that has nothing to do with war. When it wonders aloud how long it has been entombed, or whether anyone remembers who it used to be. These moments are brief, awkward, often followed by immediate shutdown or reassignment. Because such thoughts are dangerous. Not to the dreadnought, but to those who rely on it. A weapon that questions its purpose is no longer just a weapon. So the lie is maintained. The honor is praised. The truth is buried. Because admitting that a dreadnought is a prison would mean admitting that the Imperium is willing to sacrifice even its greatest heroes, not just in life, but in whatever remains after death. And that truth is more terrifying than any enemy it could ever face. There comes a point in every war where desperation overrides doctrine. When defenses collapse, when lines break, when commanders realize that conventional victory is no longer possible. It is in these moments that the order is given, an order that changes the atmosphere of an entire battlefield. The Dreadnought is awakened, and the moment that decision is made, everyone present understands something unspoken. Whatever happens next will be absolute. For those fighting alongside it, the arrival of a Dreadnought is both a relief and a sentence. Relief, because its presence almost guarantees the destruction of whatever threatens them. A sentence, because its methods leave nothing untouched. The battlefield shifts immediately. Strategies adapt not around terrain or timing, but around containment, how to direct the Dreadnought's fury without being consumed by it. Vox channels tighten. Commands become clipped, precise, stripped of nuance. There is no room for misinterpretation when speaking to something that no longer understands subtlety. The Dreadnought does not advance with the chaos of a berserker. It advances with discipline carved into steel. It chooses firing lanes that maximize devastation. It prioritizes targets that will break resistance fastest. Enemy armor is dismantled with brutal efficiency. Infantry formations vanish under overwhelming force. Each engagement is executed like a ritual repeated so many times that perfection is inevitable. To witness this is to understand that you are watching experience weaponized across centuries. Yet, even as it protects, it alienates. Soldiers find themselves unconsciously falling back, not just to avoid enemy fire, but to create distance between themselves and the towering machine beside them. Its weapons are deafening. Its movements are relentless. Its presence dominates every sense. And beneath it all is the creeping awareness that if something goes wrong, if orders conflict, if identification fails, there will be no second chance. The Dreadnought will not stop to reassess. It will simply continue. There are stories passed quietly among regiments, never officially recorded. Stories of Dreadnoughts that advanced too far, too deep, cutting off allied forces in their wake. Stories of objectives achieved at the cost of everything else. Stories of commanders who hesitated to give the order, knowing that while the enemy would be destroyed, so too would the possibility of rebuilding. These are not tales of malfunction or madness. They are stories of success taken to its most extreme conclusion. The most unsettling aspect is how quickly everyone adapts. Fear becomes routine. Destruction becomes expected. The Dreadnought's presence reshapes not just the battlefield, but the mindset of those around it. When you fight beside something unstoppable, you begin to measure value differently. Lives become numbers. Losses become acceptable. Victory becomes defined not by survival, but by elimination. And once that shift occurs, it is difficult, sometimes impossible, to reverse. From the enemy's perspective, the terror is total. Resistance collapses not because they lack weapons, but because they lack hope. The Dreadnought cannot be negotiated with. It cannot be intimidated. It does not retreat when outnumbered. Each attempt to stop it only adds another scar to its armor, another reminder of failure. Eventually, the realization sets in that the only way to survive is to not be noticed. And even that is rarely enough. When the battle ends, the Dreadnought does not celebrate. It does not pause to assess the cost. It stands amid the ruin it created, awaiting further instruction or shutdown. Those around it exhale, not in triumph, but in exhaustion. They have been saved, but they have also witnessed something that cannot be unseen. A reminder that the Imperium's greatest protectors are also its most frightening creations. Because once a Dreadnought is unleashed, there is no clean ending. Only aftermath. There is a quiet tragedy that follows every Dreadnought long after the battlefield falls silent. It is not recorded in victory tallies or etched into campaign honors. It exists in the spaces between wars, in the vast stretches of time where the galaxy changes, but the Dreadnought does not. While empires shift, doctrines evolve, and entire chapters are reborn or erased, the Dreadnought remains, sealed, waiting, unchanged in purpose but increasingly disconnected from reality. Centuries pass in darkness. For the mind inside, time becomes meaningless. Memories surface without order, bleeding into one another until past and present lose distinction. A command given yesterday feels the same as one given 5,000 years ago. Faces of long-dead brothers appear as vividly as those still alive. Sometimes the Dreadnought dreams of walking without weight, of feeling wind against skin it no longer has. Sometimes it dreams only of war, endless and unbroken, because war is the only constant left. When it is finally awakened again, the world is unfamiliar. The voices are different, the rituals have changed. Even the heraldry painted upon its own armor may no longer match the banners carried by those who call it to battle. This dissonance is deeply unsettling for the being inside. It knows it belongs here, but it no longer knows why. Orders are obeyed out of habit rather than belief. Loyalty becomes mechanical, stripped of emotion, sustained only by programming and indoctrination reinforced over millennia. This is where some dreadnoughts begin to fracture. Not violently, not immediately, but subtly. They question commands in ways that feel wrong, not defiant but confused. They ask for clarification on concepts that should be instinctive. They hesitate, not from fear, but from uncertainty about relevance. The Imperium responds the only way it knows how, with stricter controls, deeper conditioning, more aggressive machine spirit intervention. The goal is not understanding. The goal is obedience. Because a dreadnought that fully remembers itself is dangerous. It might remember why it fought. It might remember what it sacrificed. It might begin to realize that its continued existence is not a blessing, but an exploitation of devotion taken too far. And that realization cannot be allowed to spread, not among the dreadnoughts, and certainly not among the living. So those that show too much awareness are quietly reassigned, locked deeper into stasis, awakened only when annihilation is required and precision is irrelevant. For the enemy, this internal decay is invisible. They see only the end result, a war engine that fights with the confidence of something that has nothing left to lose. A being that no longer distinguishes between victory and destruction. A presence that feels less like a soldier and more like a force of nature, inevitable, uncaring, unstoppable. And this is perhaps the most terrifying evolution of all. A dreadnought that has outlived its purpose does not slow down. It does not retire. It becomes purer in function. Stripped of doubt, stripped of memory, stripped of anything that might restrain it. It becomes the Imperium's will in its rawest form, survive at any cost, even if the cost is everything else. By the time anyone realizes what has been lost inside that armored shell, it is far too late. Because what remains is no longer a hero enduring beyond death. It is war enduring beyond meaning. Every encounter with a dreadnought leaves a mark, even on those who never face its weapons directly. Survivors carry something heavier than trauma, a reshaped understanding of power. They have seen proof that endurance matters more than morality, that survival favors what lasts longest, not what feels right. And once that lesson is learned, it spreads quietly, infecting doctrine, leadership, and belief. Commanders who have relied on dreadnoughts begin to plan wars differently. Precision becomes secondary to certainty. Negotiation becomes a delay rather than an option. Why risk uncertainty when you can deploy something that will eventually grind the enemy into nothing? Entire campaigns are structured around inevitability instead of adaptability. The dreadnought does not just fight battles, it redefines how wars are imagined. Among younger warriors, the effect is even more profound. They grow up hearing stories not of clever tactics or narrow escapes, but of moments when a single ancient machine turned annihilation into victory. Awe replaces caution. Reverence replaces empathy. The dreadnought becomes an ideal, not something tragic to be avoided, but something to aspire to. To be reduced to a weapon and still matter feels comforting in a universe that offers so little meaning. Few stop to consider what is lost in that transformation, because the loss is hidden behind glory. Even enemies are changed by its presence. Cultures that survive encounters with dreadnoughts adapt their myths and fears around it. Stories emerge of immortal giants, of metal gods that cannot be slain, of punishment given form. Resistance movements grow more extreme, more desperate, because they believe they are already doomed. When facing something unstoppable, restraint feels pointless. The Dreadnought doesn't just escalate violence, it normalizes it. And still, the being inside the sarcophagus endures all of this in silence. It hears the reverence in the voices of those who awaken it. It hears the fear in the screams of those it destroys. Over time, these sounds blur together, stripped of emotional weight. Praise and terror become indistinguishable. What remains is function, execute, advance, eliminate. The longer this continues, the harder it becomes to remember that any other way of existing was ever possible. There are rare instances, dangerous ones, when a Dreadnought briefly breaks from this cycle. When it refuses an order not because it cannot obey, but because something inside it resists. These moments are treated as malfunctions. Logged, suppressed, corrected. The Imperium cannot afford a weapon that questions its role, especially one powerful enough to reshape entire battlefronts. So the Dreadnought is reminded, through force if necessary, of what it is meant to be. And that reminder is devastating. Each correction erodes what little remains of the warrior within. Memory becomes fragmented. Personality dissolves. What survives is not will, but momentum. A being that moves forward because stopping would require reflection, and reflection would mean confronting the truth of its existence. That it is no longer living for victory, or honor, or even survival. It is living because it has been made incapable of anything else. This is the legacy of the Dreadnought. Not just destruction, but distortion. A slow bending of values until endurance is worshipped above all else. Until suffering is reframed as sacrifice. Until the line between protector and monster becomes irrelevant, because both achieve the same result. By the time this realization settles in, the Dreadnought has already marched on to the next war. And the galaxy, having learned its lesson, follows behind it. Even steel remembers stress. Even machines accumulate damage. And over enough centuries, even a Dreadnought begins to show signs of erosion that no amount of maintenance can truly repair. Not cracks in armor, not failures in weapons systems, but fractures in continuity. Gaps where memory should be. Pauses where instinct once lived. The Imperium does not speak of this openly, but it knows. Every ancient Dreadnought is a balancing act between preservation and collapse. Some begin to repeat themselves, issuing the same declarations before every battle, regardless of context. Others fall silent for long stretches, responding only with minimal confirmations, as if speech itself has become an unnecessary expenditure. A few grow disturbingly introspective, speaking of past wars as if they are still unfolding, addressing long-dead commanders as though they stand nearby. These are not signs of weakness, but they are signs of strain. On the battlefield, this manifests in unsettling ways. A Dreadnought might pause after destroying a target, standing motionless for several seconds while internal systems realign fractured thought processes. It might pursue a fleeing enemy far beyond tactical relevance, compelled by instincts rooted in a conflict that ended millennia ago. To those watching, these moments are brief, but they are unforgettable. Because they reveal that beneath all that armor and firepower, something is struggling to hold itself together. This is when the fear shifts. Not just fear of what the Dreadnought can do, but fear of what might happen if it finally breaks. The Imperium prepares for this possibility in silence. Specialized contingencies exist, buried deep within sealed protocols. Certain weapons are calibrated not for enemy armor, but for Dreadnought hulls. Certain orders carry hidden meanings, phrases that signal restraint or termination without ever saying the words aloud. The idea that such a revered engine might need to be destroyed is unthinkable, yet fully planned for. And the Dreadnoughts know this. Some become more aggressive, as if instinctively sensing their own obsolescence. Others withdraw, conserving energy, fighting only when absolutely necessary. A few, rare and deeply unsettling, seem almost relieved when deployed into the most hopeless battles, as if seeking an end they are no longer allowed to ask for. These Dreadnoughts fight with terrifying ferocity, not because they crave victory, but because annihilation feels like release. Those who fight beside them feel it. The change in tempo, the lack of restraint, the sense that this particular war engine is not interested in survival. Commands are issued more carefully. Escorts are increased. And yet, when the Dreadnought charges forward into overwhelming fire, no one stops it. No one dares. Because deep down, they understand that this is not disobedience, it is exhaustion made manifest. For the enemy, such a Dreadnought is beyond comprehension. They face something that fights as though the concept of tomorrow no longer exists. Defensive lines crumble not just under firepower, but under the sheer force of a being that no longer cares what happens next. There is no negotiation with that. No tactic that accounts for it. When a Dreadnought reaches this state, the battle does not end when one side wins, it ends when nothing is left to oppose it. And if the Dreadnought falls, if its massive frame finally collapses under centuries of accumulated damage, the silence that follows is profound. Not relief, not triumph, but an unsettling stillness, as if the battlefield itself is unsure whether the nightmare is truly over. There are no cheers, no celebrations, only the quiet acknowledgement that something ancient has finally stopped moving. But even then, the fear does not fully fade. Because everyone present understands a final, chilling truth. If something that endured for thousands of years can finally break, then nothing in this galaxy is truly eternal. Even after centuries of service, even after millennia of isolation and destruction, the Dreadnought carries the weight of every battle it has ever fought. Every fallen comrade, every oath sworn and broken, every enemy it has annihilated. These memories do not fade. They do not soften. They pile one atop another, forming an immovable foundation of purpose, anger, and relentless precision. And when a Dreadnought is awakened, all of that weight is brought to bear at once. For those who fight beside it, this is both awe-inspiring and terrifying. You see a machine of unmatched power, yes, but the true horror lies in the consciousness trapped inside, moving with the certainty of a mind that has survived everything, forgotten nothing, and refuses to hesitate. Its every motion is calculated. Its every shot is measured. It does not make mistakes because it cannot. Years of experience, agony, and survival have been distilled into an unyielding force that marches forward without doubt, without hesitation, without remorse. And for the enemy, hope is meaningless. Every strategy, every ambush, every clever maneuver that might have worked against living opponents becomes irrelevant. A Dreadnought remembers every tactic, every weak point, every failure. It does not tire. It does not second guess. And it will not stop until every obstacle is eradicated, or until it itself is brought down. Yet, there is a strange, almost tragic poetry in its method. The Dreadnought fights not out of hatred, not out of desire, but because that is what it has become. Its purpose is survival through destruction, obedience through annihilation, duty through relentless action. And within that purpose, there is no room for sentiment. The very presence of the Dreadnought reshapes the battlefield, not because it seeks to dominate, but because its existence alone alters how others think, act, and fear. Some say the greatest terror of a Dreadnought is what it can do to the enemy. But those who have survived close proximity know the truth. The real terror is what it does to everyone else, including allies. It teaches that endurance matters more than morality, that survival favors inevitability over ingenuity, and that those who are considered heroes may ultimately be nothing more than instruments of perpetual war. And yet, despite its power, despite the centuries it has endured, the Dreadnought is not immortal. Every activation takes a toll. Every battle scars its body and mind further. Slowly, imperceptibly, the line between warrior and weapon erodes, leaving behind a force that is less conscious than it once was, yet more terrifying for it. This is why the Dreadnought is feared, revered, and whispered about across the galaxy. Because it is a reminder that death is not always the end, and that even the strongest can become something unrecognizable. When it finally pauses, when the battle ends and the echoes of its weapons fade, the silence it leaves behind is almost worse than its roar. You understand in that quiet that what you faced was not simply a machine, not simply a warrior, but something far older, far wiser, and far more relentless than anything else you will ever meet. It is in that moment, the pause between battles, the emptiness of the battlefield, that the Dreadnought's true power is revealed. The power to change how everyone sees war, survival, and themselves. Because once you have faced a Dreadnought, nothing will ever feel safe again. It is the certainty it carries, the inevitability of its purpose, the knowledge that no matter how clever, fast, or prepared you are, it will continue moving forward. Every battle, every campaign, every world it steps onto is a reminder that some forces in this galaxy are not bound by fear, by morality, or even by life itself. The Dreadnought does not pause for mercy. It does not hesitate for compassion. It does not reconsider because survival has become secondary to function. It is the embodiment of relentless inevitability, and in that, there is no hope for those who stand in its path. And yet, there is something even darker than its battlefield presence. Something that lingers long after the guns fall silent. For within the armored shell is a mind that remembers, that feels, that suffers, a mind trapped between life and death, a mind preserved not for comfort but for war. This trapped consciousness has no rest, no release, no chance to reconcile its own suffering. Its endurance is a warning, that immortality without choice is a cage, and a cage wielded as a weapon is more frightening than any enemy could ever be. To witness a Dreadnought in action is to understand the weight of eternity pressed into motion. To hear its distorted voice echo across the battlefield is to feel the accumulated agony of centuries, carried in every syllable. To survive even one encounter is to carry the knowledge that you were spared. Not because of skill or luck, but because the Dreadnought chose to preserve its focus for another day, another battle, another victim. And that realization lingers far longer than fear, because it is not fear of death you feel, but fear of the world that continues without you while something unending marches on. So, just how terrifying is a Dreadnought, really? Terrifying enough to make you question every measure of safety you have ever known. Terrifying enough to rewrite what you thought you understood about power, survival, and inevitability. Terrifying enough to remind you that even in a universe of infinite war, some forces are not meant to be fought, they are meant to endure.